In the heart of a community, James Carter stood at a crossroads, the weight of a legacy pressing heavily on his shoulders. With Evelyn Walker's vision at the forefront, his journey to transform lives was just beginning. But the road ahead was anything but certain. As James gazed out over the crowd, the air was thick with anticipation. Evelyn's foundation had brought hope to many, but the true test was yet to come. "This isn't just about buildings," he whispered. "It's about people." With every word he spoke, the stakes grew higher. Would he rise to the challenge, or would the weight of expectation crush him? Before we journey further into this unforgettable story, make sure you're subscribed to Epic Story Moments. Hit that bell icon now so you never miss an incredible tale. Join our community by liking, sharing, and commenting to keep these heartwarming stories coming. And hey, tell us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you all. James Carter adjusted the oversized suit jacket he had borrowed from their neighbor. Though it hung awkwardly on his lean frame, he couldn't afford to be self-conscious. Tonight wasn't about appearances. It was about opportunity. The towering wrought iron gates of the mansion loomed before him, their intricate design a stark contrast to the cracked sidewalks of his neighborhood. Beyond the gates, the sprawling estate glowed in the golden hues of twilight. Polished luxury cars lined the circular driveway, their elegance reflecting a world James had never known. As he stepped forward, a valet appeared with a polite smile. "Good evening, sir. May I park your car?" James hesitated, his cheeks flushing. I walked here," he mumbled. The valet's expression remained neutral, but James could feel the weight of unspoken judgment. Squaring his shoulders, he moved past the valet and toward the grand entrance. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and expensive cologne, a sensory reminder of the chasm between his life and this one. Inside, the mansion was even more opulent. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light across the room, and the soft murmur of conversation blended with the faint strains of classical music. Wealth dripped from every detail: the silk drapes, the marble floors, the ornate golden fixtures. James felt like an intruder, a trespasser in a world he didn't belong to. "James, over here." He turned to see Jordan, his co-worker, waving enthusiastically from across the room. Jordan's tailored suit and easy demeanor made him blend seamlessly with the crowd. James made his way over, dodging waiters carrying trays of champagne flutes. "You made it." Jordan grinned, clapping him on the back. "I was starting to think you'd bail." "I almost did," James admitted, his voice low. "This isn't really my scene." "That's the point," Jordan said with a wink. "You're here to meet people who can change your life. Trust me. Just stick close to me, and I'll introduce you around." For the next hour, James followed Jordan through the sea of affluent guests. He shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and tried to ignore the subtle looks of curiosity, or was it condescension, from those who noticed his ill-fitting suit. The conversations felt hollow, filled with superficial compliments and business jargon that flew over his head. Just as he was about to excuse himself, a voice interrupted. "You must be James Carter." James turned to see an older man, impeccably dressed in a midnight blue tuxedo. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and his piercing blue eyes held a sharpness that made James stand straighter. "I'm William Sterling," the man said, extending a hand. "I've heard about you from Jordan here. He says you're a law student with big dreams." James hesitated before shaking his hand. "Yes, sir. That's right." William's gaze swept over him, as if appraising his worth. "Ambition is a valuable trait, young man. But ambition without resources is like a ship without a sail. Tell me, James, what are you willing to do to achieve your goals?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. James's mind raced. He thought of his mother's frail frame, Elijah's hopeful eyes, and the mountain of bills waiting back home. "Anything," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." William's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good. I admire determination. Let's talk in my study." Jordan gave James a reassuring nod as William led him down a quiet hallway. The study was just as grand as the rest of the mansion, with walls lined with leather-bound books and a roaring fireplace casting flickering shadows. William gestured for James to sit. "I won't waste your time, James," William began, his tone brisk. "I have a proposition for you. I'm an old man with more money than I know what to do with, but no family to leave it to. What I do have is a business empire that needs stability and continuity. I'm willing to offer you financial support for your education and your family's needs. In exchange for one thing." James leaned forward, his heart pounding. "What's that?" "A marriage," William said simply. James blinked, convinced he had misheard. "A marriage. To me," William clarified, his tone unwavering. "It's a strategic move, not a romantic one. I need someone I can trust, someone who will inherit my estate and continue my legacy. In return, I'll pay off all your debts, cover your mother's medical expenses, and ensure your family's financial security for life." The room seemed to tilt. James struggled to process the words, his mind reeling with questions. Why him? Was this some kind of joke? But as he looked into William's eyes, he saw no hint of deceit, only a cold, calculating sincerity. "I don't expect an answer right away," William said, rising to his feet. "Think it over, but don't take too long. Opportunities like this don't come often." James left the mansion that night with a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of the proposition pressed heavily on him, and sleep eluded him. By morning, he knew what he had to do. 7 days later, James stood beside William in a private ceremony, their vows exchanged with little fanfare. The decision had been agonizing, but he reminded himself why he had agreed: his family's survival. But as the days turned into weeks, James began to uncover secrets about William's past. Secrets that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the man who had changed his life forever. Secrets that would force him to confront the true cost of his choices and what it meant to sacrifice for the ones he loved. James Carter tightened his grip on the worn leather strap of his bag, glancing up at the grand estate before him. The wrought iron gates, glimmering under soft golden lights, seemed almost like a barrier to another world, one where privilege and ease flourished, untouched by the struggles he carried every day. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his borrowed suit jacket. It wasn't a perfect fit, but he couldn't let that stop him. As he passed through the gates, the distant hum of polite laughter and clinking glasses grew louder. The mansion was a spectacle, bathed in opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings like suspended stars, casting a warm glow over the marble floors. The air was scented with lavender and something indefinably luxurious. James hesitated in the grand foyer, his heart pounding. His polished shoes, a gift from his late father, squeaked faintly on the glossy tiles, a stark reminder of how out of place he was. A small group of sharply dressed men and women by the bar burst into laughter, their voices mingling with talk of politics, investments, and extravagant vacations. He tugged at his tie, his discomfort a knot in his stomach. Why had he come here? He'd wanted to leave the moment he arrived, but he remembered his little brother Elijah's words. Asterisk, you have to try, James. You never know what could happen. Asterisk, the memory of his mother's frail smile added weight to his resolve. Looking for an escape route, young man? The voice was warm yet laced with humor. James turned to see an elegant older woman standing nearby, her silver hair framing a face lined with years of experience and wisdom. She held a champagne flute in one hand, her other hand resting lightly on a cane carved with intricate designs. Her navy blue dress shimmered faintly under the chandelier's glow. James stammered, caught off guard. Just taking it all in. She chuckled softly. Quite the scene, isn't it? Overwhelming at first, but don't let it intimidate you. I'm Evelyn Walker. She extended a hand, her smile genuine. James hesitated before shaking it. James Carter. Nice to meet you. Evelyn studied him with a curious glint in her eyes. Tell me, James, What brings you here tonight? And don't say networking. That's what everyone says. He gave a small, self-conscious laugh. Honestly, a coworker thought it might be good for me. Said I should meet people who could open doors. And do you feel those doors opening yet? Evelyn asked, her tone playful yet probing. Not exactly, James admitted, glancing around. I'm not sure I belong here. Belonging is overrated, she replied with a knowing smile. Why don't we sit? You look like you could use a break. She led him to a quieter corner of the room, away from the crowd. They sat by a tall window, with a murmur of conversation faded into the background. For the first time that evening, James felt a small measure of comfort. So, James, Evelyn began, setting her glass down. Tell me your story. He hesitated, unsure of how much to share. But something about Evelyn's presence made him feel safe, as though she genuinely cared. Slowly, he began to talk. He told her about his mother, Loretta, who was battling diabetes, and his younger brother, Elijah, who dreamed of becoming an engineer. He spoke of his father, Marcus, whose unexpected death had left him reeling. We've been struggling ever since, James said, his voice heavy with emotion. But I can't give up. I'm in law school and I'm going to finish no matter what. My mom deserves better. My brother deserves better. Evelyn listened intently, her expression softening. That's a heavy burden to carry, James. But it sounds like you're the kind of person who turns burdens into purpose. James shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. It's not like I have a choice. Oh, but you do, she said gently. You could have chosen to give up. Many do. But you're here. That says something. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing naturally despite their vastly different worlds. Evelyn spoke of her late husband, a philanthropist who had believed in giving back to those who needed it most. After his death, she had continued his work, focusing on education and opportunities for underprivileged communities. I've met so many brilliant, capable people who just needed a chance, she said, her voice tinged with both sadness and determination. That's what drives me, leveling the playing field, even if it's just a little. James was struck by her sincerity. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen, not as a struggling student or a token attendee, but as a person with potential. As the evening wound down, Evelyn reached into her small clutch and handed him a card. James, it's been a pleasure. I'd like to stay in touch. If you ever need advice or just someone to listen, don't hesitate to call. James took the card, stunned. Thank you, Mrs. Walker. I don't even know what to say. Just promise me one thing, she said, her eyes locking with his. Don't ever underestimate what you're capable of. As James left the mansion, the crisp night air filled his lungs. He looked up at the star-studded sky, his mind racing with the possibilities ahead. The encounter with Evelyn Walker had been more than just chance. It was a spark of hope in a life that had felt unbearably heavy. And for the first time in a long while, James allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future held something brighter. James Carter's small apartment was bathed in a soft, golden light as the morning sun seeped through the cracked blinds. He stirred, the exhaustion from juggling late-night shifts, relentless law classes, and the echoes of Evelyn Walker's words weighing on him. Her voice, calm and resolute, had left an indelible mark. It wasn't every day that someone from a world so distant from his believed in him so openly. He stretched, dragging himself to the tiny kitchen, his mind swirling with questions. The sharp buzz of his phone shattered the quiet. Glancing at the screen, he saw an unfamiliar number. After a hesitant moment, he swiped to answer. Hello, James. This is Evelyn Walker, came the familiar, poised voice. Caught off guard, James gripped the counter. Mrs. Walker? Good morning. I didn't think I'd hear from you again. A soft chuckle from the other end. I hope you don't mind me calling. I've been reflecting on our conversation, and I feel there's more we should discuss. Are you free to meet today? James's mind raced. Why would someone like her, a beacon of wealth and influence, want to meet him again? Sure. Where should I go? My home, Evelyn said, her tone warm yet firm. I'll send my driver to pick you up. Does 2 o'clock work? Perfect, James replied, though his stomach churned with unease. The call ended, leaving James to stare at the screen. Why would she want to see him? What could she possibly have to say? By 2 o'clock, a sleek black car glided to a stop outside his modest building. The driver, a sharply dressed man, opened the door with a courteous nod. The car's interior was immaculate, the ride smoother than anything James had ever experienced. As the city blurred past, James couldn't ignore the stark contrast between his ride and his usual overcrowded bus commute. When they reached Evelyn's estate, its grandeur once again struck him. A sprawling lawn, towering gates, and a home that seemed plucked from a storybook. This time, however, its majesty felt tinged with foreboding. The butler ushered him into a sunlit sitting room, where Evelyn awaited. She was seated in an elegant armchair, a tray of tea and pastries laid before her. She looked up with a warm smile as he entered. "James, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. "Thank you for inviting me," he replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. Evelyn asked after his family, his studies, and his work, her questions thoughtful and genuine. James found himself relaxing slightly, though he sensed an underlying gravity in her demeanor. Finally, Evelyn set down her teacup, her gaze meeting his with quiet intensity. "James, there's something I'd like to share with you. It's personal, but I believe you'll understand why I'm telling you." James leaned forward, curiosity replacing his unease. Evelyn's voice softened. "I haven't always been who you see today. Many years ago, I lived a life consumed by privilege, blind to the struggles of those around me. That changed one night, when a young black man saved my life." James blinked, startled. "Saved your life?" Evelyn nodded, her expression somber. "I was walking home late when a man tried to rob me. He had a knife, and I was paralyzed with fear. Out of nowhere, this young man intervened. He fought off my attacker and stayed with me until I was safe. I never even got his name, but that moment opened my eyes. It made me see the world differently, to understand the disparities and injustices others face." She paused, her gaze distant. "From that night on, I vowed to use my privilege to make a difference. It became my life's mission to support those who've been marginalized." James listened, her story striking a deep chord. "That's incredible," he said, unsure what else to say. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Thank you, and that's why I asked you here today. James, I see something in you, strength, determination, resilience. The kind of qualities the world needs." James felt heat rise to his cheeks. "I'm just trying to get by," he murmured. "And you do so with dignity and grace," Evelyn replied firmly. "That's why I want to make you an offer." The room seemed to still as she leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "James, I'm dying. I have a terminal illness, and the doctors say I have less than a year." James's breath caught. He had noticed her frailty, but hadn't imagined it was this dire. I'm so sorry," he whispered. Evelyn waved a hand gently. "Don't be. I've made peace with it. But before I go, I want to ensure my legacy continues. My foundation, my resources, they need someone with vision and integrity to guide them. Someone like you." James stared at her, stunned. "I don't understand. What are you saying?" Evelyn's next words landed like a thunderclap. "I want you to marry me." James blinked, sure he had misheard. "And marry you?" "Yes," she said, her tone calm yet resolute. "Not for romance or tradition, but as a partnership, a means to ensure that everything I've built continues to make a difference. You, James, are the kind of person who can change the world, and I want to give you the tools to do it." Her words hung in the air, surreal and incomprehensible. James struggled to find his voice, his world tilting on its axis. This wasn't just an offer. It was a challenge, a test, and a chance at a future he had never dared to imagine. The golden rays of the morning sun seeped through the cracked blinds of James Carter's modest apartment, stirring him awake far earlier than he'd planned. He groaned, his body weighed down by the exhaustion of juggling endless shifts at work, the pressure of school deadlines, and the emotional burden of last night's conversation with Evelyn Walker. Her words lingered in his mind, not as a passing thought but as an echo of something much deeper. Her calm confidence had pierced through the veil of doubt that often clouded his thoughts. How was it that a stranger believed in him so openly when even he struggled to do so? As he shuffled to the kitchen, the old linoleum tiles cold beneath his bare feet, his phone buzzed on the counter. Picking it up, he squinted at the screen. The caller ID was unknown. For a moment he hesitated, his finger hovering over the answer icon. With a deep breath, he swiped and raised the phone to his ear. "Hello," he said cautiously. "James, this is Evelyn Walker," came the measured yet familiar voice on the other end. He blinked in surprise, gripping the phone tighter. He hadn't expected her to follow up after their chance meeting at the fundraiser. "Oh, good morning, Mrs. Walker. I didn't think I'd hear from you again." Evelyn chuckled softly, a sound that carried warmth. "I hope you don't mind me calling. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'd like to meet with you again. Are you free today? There's something important I'd like to discuss." James hesitated, his mind racing with possibilities. Why would a wealthy, influential woman like her want to meet him again? I guess I can be free," he stammered. "Where should I go?" "My home," she replied, her tone warm yet firm. "I'll send my driver to pick you up. Does 2 o'clock work?" Yeah, that works," James replied, his voice trailing off as the call ended abruptly. He stared at the phone, a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. What could she possibly want? At exactly 2 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up outside his apartment building, gleaming like something out of a dream. The driver, dressed in an immaculate suit, stepped out and opened the door for James with a polite nod. James climbed in hesitantly, the plush leather seats and smooth hum of the engine starkly contrasting his usual rickety bus rides. The city blurred past the tinted windows as they drove, each mile heightening his sense of unease. When they arrived, the towering gates of Evelyn's estate loomed before him, an imposing testament to her wealth. As the car rolled up the long driveway, James took in the meticulously manicured lawns and grand architecture, feeling more out of place with each step. The butler who greeted him at the door led him to a sunlit sitting room where Evelyn awaited. Seated gracefully in a plush armchair, a tray of tea and delicate pastries sat before her on the coffee table. "James," she said warmly, her smile genuine, "I'm glad you could make it. Please have a seat." James sank into the chair opposite her, his movements careful. As they exchanged pleasantries, she asked him about his family, his classes, and his work. Her questions were thoughtful, and she listened intently. But James sensed there was more behind this meeting. Finally, Evelyn set her teacup down, her demeanor shifting. "James," she began, her voice soft, "I haven't always been the woman you see today. Many years ago, I lived a life consumed by power and wealth, blind to the struggles of others. That changed one night." Her gaze grew distant as she recounted the story. "I was walking home late when a man tried to rob me. He had a knife, and I froze in fear. A young black man, a complete stranger, intervened. He fought the attacker off and stayed with me until I was safe. I never got his name, but that moment, it opened my eyes." James listened intently, his heart pounding as her words struck a chord deep within him. "That night," she continued, "I vowed to use my privilege to help those who have been marginalized. It became my life's mission." She paused, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "James, you remind me of that young man. Your determination, your strength, your heart. They're rare qualities. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure how to respond. "I'm just trying to get by," he muttered. "And yet you do so with dignity and resilience," she said firmly. "That's why I'm making you an offer." James frowned, his curiosity piqued. "What kind of offer?" Evelyn took a deep breath, her next words measured. "I'm dying, James. The doctors say I have less than a year left." The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. I'm so sorry," he whispered. She shook her head gently. "Don't be. I've made peace with it. But before I go, I want to ensure my legacy lives on. My foundation, my resources, they need someone with vision and integrity to guide them. Someone like you." James stared at her, stunned. "I don't understand. What are you saying?" "I want you to marry me," she said, her tone calm and matter-of-fact. The words hung in the air, surreal and incomprehensible. "Marry you?" "Yes," Evelyn replied steadily. "It's not about romance. It's a partnership. This is the simplest way to transfer my estate and foundation to you." James's mind reeled. The idea was absurd, bizarre even. "Mrs. Walker, I don't think I can do that." "I understand your hesitation," she said gently. "But think about what this could mean for your family. Your mother could get the care she needs. Your brother could go to the best schools. And you could use these resources to make real change in the world." The weight of her words pressed down on him, the enormity of the choice sinking in. "Can I think about it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," she said with a nod. "But remember, James, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most profound changes." As James left her estate, her words echoed in his mind. The days that followed were a blur, each one filled with doubt and endless questions. The decision before him wasn't just about his life. It was about the lives of those he loved most. Could he shoulder the burden of this choice for their sake? James recited his vows with a trembling voice, each word weighted by the surreal reality of the moment. "I do," he said finally, meeting Evelyn's calm gaze. Her serene expression didn't waver, but her eyes glimmered with unspoken emotion. When the ceremony concluded, polite applause echoed through the chapel. Evelyn rested her hand lightly on James's arm, her voice soft yet earnest. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, her tone carrying a sincerity that James couldn't quite define. At the reception in the grand dining room of Evelyn's estate, James sat with his mother, Loretta, and younger brother, Elijah, trying to process the whirlwind of events. The atmosphere was subdued, almost formal, as Evelyn mingled with the small circle of guests. Loretta placed a reassuring hand on James's, her tired but gentle smile offering silent encouragement. Elijah, wide-eyed and awed by the mansion's grandeur, remained uncharacteristically quiet, his gaze darting around the room as if unsure of his place. Later that evening, Evelyn invited James into her study. The room was imposing yet warm, with walls lined with leather-bound books and a massive oak desk that seemed to radiate authority. She gestured for James to sit across from her. "Now that we're officially partners," she began, her voice steady, "there are a few things we need to discuss." James nodded, unsure of what to expect. "First," Evelyn said, her tone matter-of-fact, "I want you to understand the foundation. It's not just a charity. It's a lifeline for many, and I need you to see its impact. Over the next few weeks, you'll meet the team and visit our projects. You'll see what this work truly means to the people we serve." James listened intently, surprised by the practicality of her words. She wasn't treating him as a pawn or a placeholder. She was preparing him for real responsibility. "Second," she continued, her tone softening, "I want you to feel at home here. This estate is as much yours now as it is mine. I know this arrangement is unconventional, but I hope you'll see it as a partnership, not an obligation." Her words caught James off guard. He struggled to reconcile the weight of their agreement with the sincerity in her voice. Finally, he said, "I'll do my best." Evelyn smiled, a rare warmth breaking through her composed exterior. That's all I asked. That night, James lay awake in the opulent bedroom that now belonged to him, staring at the intricate designs on the ceiling. His mind churned with doubts and questions about the road he had chosen, but for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a dead end. It was uncertain, yes, but it carried a flicker of hope. The next morning, sunlight poured into the dining room, bathing it in a golden glow. Evelyn entered with her usual composed grace, leaning slightly on her cane. "Good morning, James," she greeted, her voice warm yet firm. "Good morning, Evelyn," James replied, stumbling slightly over her name. She smiled faintly. "You'll get used to it. How are you settling in?" "It's the lot," he admitted. "This place feels like a different world." Evelyn chuckled softly. "It must, but you'll find your place here. Eat, James. You will need your energy. We're visiting one of the Foundation's projects today." "Already?" he asked, surprised. "I thought I'd have more time to adjust." "There's no better way to learn than by doing," Evelyn replied. "I want you to see firsthand what this work means to people." By mid-morning, they were on the road, accompanied by Evelyn's efficient assistant, Clara. As they drove through the city, Evelyn explained their destination, a community center in a predominantly black neighborhood that her foundation had helped establish. "It's one of our oldest projects," she said. "We provide after-school programs, job training, and much more. It's a place where hope thrives." When they arrived, James was struck by the vibrant energy surrounding the center. Children played basketball on a nearby court, their laughter ringing through the air. Inside, adults attended workshops, while colorful murals celebrating black culture and history adorned the walls. Evelyn introduced James to staff members and volunteers, each greeting her with respect and warmth. One of the coordinators, a middle-aged woman named Gloria, pulled James aside. "She's an incredible woman," Gloria said, nodding toward Evelyn. "This center wouldn't exist without her. She doesn't just write checks. She's here making sure we have what we need." James felt a surge of admiration for Evelyn. This was more than charity. It was her life's work. As he watched her interact with the children, her stern demeanor softened into genuine affection. Throughout the day, James began to understand the depth of Evelyn's commitment. Her conversations with parents were filled with compassion and practical advice. She encouraged teenagers to dream big, while ensuring they had the resources to achieve those dreams. By the time they left, James's perspective had shifted. The foundation wasn't just about money or status. It was about creating opportunities, building hope, and changing lives. And now, that legacy was in his hands. As the car rolled back toward the estate, Evelyn turned to James, her expression thoughtful. "You've seen what this work means," she said. "Do you think you're ready to be a part of it?" James hesitated, then nodded. "I think I am." For the first time, Evelyn's composed facade cracked, and she smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Good," she said simply. "Then let's get to work." And for James, the journey truly began. Page, where Evelyn's handwriting filled the lines with meticulous care. The first entry was dated decades ago, detailing the inception of her foundation. As James read, her words painted a vivid picture of a younger Evelyn. Idealistic, determined, and unwavering in her mission to create meaningful change. The journal chronicled not only her successes, but also her struggles and failures. Evelyn had faced opposition, doubt, and even betrayal from those she thought she could trust. Yet, through it all, she had persisted, driven by the belief that her work mattered. Each page revealed another layer of her, from the personal sacrifices she made to the moments of joy and fulfillment she experienced when lives were transformed. James's hands trembled as he turned the pages, his mind flooded with admiration and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Among the entries, he found sketches and diagrams for future projects, lists of potential partners, and even notes addressed to people she had helped along the way. Evelyn had planned meticulously, thinking far beyond her own lifetime. At the bottom of the safe, James discovered a set of envelopes tied with a ribbon. Each envelope bore a name and a date. One, labeled James Carter, caught his eye. He untied the ribbon and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter she had written specifically for him. "James," it began, "you must know that this journey will not be easy. There will be days when you feel the weight of the world pressing down on you, when doubt creeps in, and when you question whether you are strong enough. On those days, I want you to remember this. You are not alone. The people you help, the lives you touch, they will stand with you. Draw strength from them, as I have. I chose you not because you were perfect, but because you have the courage to grow, to face your fears, and to fight for what is right. You have the heart of a leader, James, and the soul of someone who understands the pain and hope of others. Trust yourself as I have trusted you." Tears blurred James's vision as he finished reading. He folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope, holding it against his chest for a moment. Evelyn's words felt like both a challenge and a comfort, urging him forward even as they acknowledged his uncertainties. For the next several weeks, James immersed himself in the Foundation's work. He met with staff, visited ongoing projects, and began forming relationships with the communities the Foundation served. Each interaction deepened his understanding of Evelyn's vision and the immense impact her work had on countless lives. One day, during a visit to a shelter for at-risk youth, James sat with a young boy named Marcus. The boy, no older than 10, spoke hesitantly about his dreams of becoming a doctor. "Do you think someone like me can do it?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James looked into the boy's wide, hopeful eyes and felt a surge of conviction. "Not only do I think you can do it," he said, his voice steady and full of warmth, "I know you can. And we're here to help you every step of the way." In that moment, James realized that his journey was not just about fulfilling Evelyn's legacy. It was about creating his own. The spark of hope he saw in Marcus's eyes mirrored the spark Evelyn had kindled in him. This was what she had envisioned. A chain of change passed from one person to the next, each link stronger than the last. Months later, as James stood at a podium addressing a crowd of supporters and beneficiaries, he felt a profound sense of purpose. The Foundation was thriving under his leadership, its reach expanding further than ever before. He spoke of Evelyn's vision, her unwavering belief in the power of compassion, and the responsibility they all shared to carry her work forward. The applause that followed was thunderous, but James's thoughts were with Evelyn. He hoped, in some way, she could see what had been accomplished and know that her trust in him had not been misplaced. That night, as James walked through the estate's gardens under a canopy of stars, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. Evelyn was gone, but her spirit remained in every life she had touched, every project she had nurtured, and every word she had written. And now, it was his turn to ensure that her legacy endured, not as a shadow of the past, but as a beacon for the future. James flipped through the pages of Evelyn Walker's journal, her elegant handwriting flowing like a river of wisdom and reflection. The words carried the weight of years spent fighting systemic injustice, igniting change and building hope. "This work is bigger than any one person," Evelyn had written. "It's about creating opportunities for those who have been denied them for too long, about breaking the cycles of poverty and injustice that trap entire generations." The journal chronicled not just her triumphs, but also the struggles, the sleepless nights, the resistance she faced, and the sacrifices she made. Every word felt alive, her passion radiating through the pages. As James read, a lump formed in his throat. She had poured her soul into this foundation, and now she had entrusted it all to him. Beneath the journal lay a thick folder labeled Immediate Actions. Inside, James found meticulously detailed plans, budgets, contacts, and handwritten notes addressed to specific individuals within the Foundation. Evelyn had thought of everything, her foresight leaving no stone unturned. Each note was a testament to her leadership, tailored to the person's role and potential. James stared at the stack of documents, his chest tightening with the enormity of the responsibility before him. He could feel Evelyn's unwavering belief in him, but the doubts in his mind whispered incessantly, "What if I fail? What if I can't live up to her vision?" The next morning, James stood before the Foundation's senior staff in the grand conference room of Evelyn's estate. The room was filled with expectant faces, a mix of skepticism and curiosity. These were people who had dedicated years to Evelyn's cause, and now they were being asked to follow a young, relatively inexperienced man. James cleared his throat, clutching Evelyn's letter in his hands. "Evelyn Walker believed in all of us," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. "She believed in our collective strength to carry this mission forward. I'm not here to replace her, no one can, but I'm here to honor her legacy and ensure that her vision lives on." He read aloud Evelyn's words, her voice echoing through the room as if she were still present. As he spoke, he saw the subtle shifts in their expressions, skepticism softening into understanding, uncertainty giving way to a glimmer of hope. By the end of the meeting, the room was quiet, the air heavy with the weight of what they had heard. Over the following weeks, James immersed himself in the work. He met with department heads, visited projects, and spent hours listening to the stories of those whose lives had been transformed by the Foundation. He quickly realized that the work wasn't just about numbers or strategies. It was about people. Every interaction, every handshake, and every story reinforced the magnitude of Evelyn's mission. But the path was far from smooth. There were whispers among the staff, questioning his qualifications. Some donors expressed their doubts openly, their skepticism wrapped in thinly veiled condescension. At one particularly tense meeting, a prominent donor leaned back in their chair, their tone sharp and direct. "Mr. Carter," they said, their gaze piercing, "do you truly believe you're equipped to handle this responsibility?" Evelyn was a visionary. Her shoes are not easy to fill. James felt a surge of frustration, but forced himself to remain calm. He met their gaze, his voice steady but firm. "I understand your doubts," he said, "and I won't pretend to be Evelyn. No one can replace her. But this isn't about me. It's about the people this foundation exists to serve. I'm here because Evelyn believed in me, and I intend to honor her faith. If you give me a chance, I'll prove to you that I'm capable of carrying this work forward." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Finally, the donor gave a reluctant nod. It wasn't a victory, but it was a step forward. That evening, James returned to Evelyn's study, seeking solace in her journal. He flipped through the pages, her reflections offering guidance and strength. One passage stood out. "Doubt will always be a companion on the journey of change, but it is in the face of doubt that we find our true strength." James looked around the study, his eyes landing on a framed photograph of Evelyn. In the picture, she stood with a group of children at a school, her smile radiant, her eyes full of purpose. He picked up the frame, his fingers tracing the edges. "I won't let you down," he whispered, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I promise." The challenges only grew in the weeks that followed. The board of directors, despite Evelyn's decision to leave James in full control, voiced their reservations. Every decision he made was scrutinized, every move questioned. But James refused to waver. He threw himself into the work, attending late-night meetings, personally overseeing projects, and addressing the concerns of both staff and beneficiaries. Slowly, his efforts began to bear fruit. Skeptics among the staff started to see his dedication, and donors began to acknowledge his resolve. One evening, as James stood on the balcony of Evelyn's estate, the crisp night air filled his lungs. Below, the garden stretched out in a symphony of colors, the faint scent of blooming flowers carried by the breeze. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to breathe, the weight of his responsibilities temporarily lifting. "This is bigger than me," he thought, the words a quiet mantra. "It always has been." As he turned to head back inside, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Clara, Evelyn's trusted assistant. "James, the new school is ready for the opening ceremony. The children can't wait to meet you." James smiled, a sense of purpose settling over him. The work was far from over, but with every step forward, He was honoring Evelyn's legacy and building one of his own. And so, James Carter stood at the crossroads of grief and determination, carrying the torch passed to him by a woman who had believed in the power of hope and action. The road ahead was long, but with Evelyn's words as his guide and his resolve as his compass, he knew he would find his way. James Carter sat at the long oak table in the grand conference room of Evelyn Walker's estate, facing the scrutinizing gazes of the Foundation's senior board members. The walls of the room, adorned with portraits of past visionaries, seemed to watch over the meeting with an air of judgment. James could feel the weight of their expectations, a heavy burden pressing against his chest. The air was thick with skepticism, a palpable tension crackling like static electricity. Robert Hayes, an older board member with silver hair and a voice that carried decades of authority, broke the silence. "Mr. Carter," he began, his tone deliberate, each word like a stone dropping into still water. "We all respected Evelyn deeply. Her vision transformed countless lives. But her decision to appoint you as her successor has left us with concerns. You're young and, frankly, inexperienced. What makes you think you can lead an organization of this magnitude?" James felt the sting of Robert's words, but he squared his shoulders, refusing to let the doubt pierce his resolve. He had anticipated such a question, yet the reality of facing it stung deeply. Taking a deep breath, he leaned slightly forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You're right," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I am young, and I don't have decades of experience. But I have something just as important: the determination to continue Evelyn's mission and a perspective shaped by the struggles this foundation is meant to address. Evelyn believed in me, and I intend to prove that her trust was not misplaced." A murmur rippled through the room, but another voice quickly followed. Linda Grayson, a sharp-eyed woman known for her no-nonsense demeanor, leaned forward. Her presence was commanding, her every movement deliberate. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice sharp. "This isn't about passion alone. It's about results." James met her gaze, his eyes steady despite the pressure. "I've been studying Evelyn's plans and the Foundation's ongoing projects," he began, his tone thoughtful but resolute. "My focus will be on expanding our outreach programs in underserved communities and ensuring we're making a tangible difference. I may not have all the answers yet, but I'm committed to working harder than anyone to find them." The room fell into an uneasy silence, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, Linda gave a small nod, her expression cautious but not entirely dismissive. "We'll hold you to that," she said, her voice carrying both challenge and a hint of reluctant approval. James's journey to prove himself began with small, achievable goals. He visited the Foundation's projects, schools, shelters, and community centers, determined to understand the work firsthand. One visit, in particular, stood out. He traveled to a struggling school in a predominantly black neighborhood, where the Foundation had recently funded new textbooks, technology, and after-school programs. The school was buzzing with life, children's laughter echoing down the hallways. As James walked through the halls, he was struck by the enthusiasm of the students and teachers. In one brightly painted classroom, a young girl with wide, curious eyes approached him, clutching a well-worn notebook. "Are you the man who helped our school?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with wonder. James knelt to her level, a warm smile breaking through the tension he carried. "I'm part of the team that helped," he replied. "But it's your teachers and principal who make the real difference." The girl beamed, her excitement lighting up the room. "I want to be a lawyer someday," she said proudly. "My mom says you're one." James felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You can be anything you want to be," he said gently. "Just keep working hard, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Moments like this fueled James's resolve, reminding him why the work mattered. But not all encounters were as uplifting. At a high-profile fundraising event, James found himself cornered by a prominent donor. The man, holding a glass of champagne, spoke with a patronizing air. "You've got a lot on your plate, young man," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "It's admirable that you're trying, but don't you think this is a bit ambitious for someone with your background?" James forced a polite smile, though his jaw clenched. "Ambition drives progress," he said evenly. Evelyn believed anyone, regardless of their background, could make a difference. "That's a belief I intend to honor." The donor raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Well, good luck with that," he said dismissively before walking away. The encounter left James frustrated, but instead of succumbing to doubt, he channeled his emotions into action. He spent his evenings in Evelyn's study, poring over her journals. Her words, filled with wisdom and resilience, became his guiding light. In one entry, she had written, "Change is never easy, and those who fight for it are often met with resistance. But the only way forward is to persist, even when the odds seem insurmountable." Those words echoed in James's mind as he faced each new challenge. Over time, he began to see himself not as an imposter, but as a steward of Evelyn's vision. Slowly but surely, he started to carve out his own path, one that honored her legacy while reflecting his unique perspective. By the end of the first month, progress was evident. The Foundation's projects were thriving, and James had begun to win over even his harshest critics. At a meeting with the board, Linda Grayson acknowledged his efforts with a rare smile. "You surprised us, James," she admitted, "but in the best way." That evening, James stood on the balcony of Evelyn's estate, overlooking the sprawling gardens below. The cool night air carried the scent of blooming flowers, a reminder of Evelyn's love for beauty and growth. Clutching a framed photograph of her, a younger Evelyn standing beside a group of smiling children, James whispered, "I won't let you down. I promise." As the stars glittered above, James felt a quiet determination settle over him. The road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. With Evelyn's spirit as his guide and his own unwavering resolve, he would ensure her vision lived on, changing lives and breaking barriers for generations to come. James Carter stood at the edge of the balcony, his eyes reflecting the glow of the city lights far below. The night air was cool, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself a breath of relief. The weight of leadership, of continuing Evelyn Walker's monumental legacy, had been suffocating at times. But tonight, as the lights flickered like stars scattered across the earth, he felt a shift within himself. The doubts that had plagued him when he first took on the mantle of leadership seemed to melt away, replaced by something stronger: purpose. It hadn't been easy. The early days had been filled with questions from the board, skepticism from donors, and the constant, gnawing fear that he might not be enough. When Robert Hayes, a senior member of the board, had questioned his ability to lead, James had stood his ground, his voice unwavering despite the sting of his words. "I may not have decades of experience," he had said then, his hands gripping the edge of the table, "but I have something equally important: determination." That had been the beginning of his journey, the first step toward proving that Evelyn's faith in him wasn't misplaced. Linda Grayson, who had once doubted his ability to follow in Evelyn's footsteps, now looked at him with a rare smile. "You surprised me, James," she admitted, her voice soft but genuine. "I didn't think you had it in you, but you've proven me wrong." The words felt like a victory, a hard-earned one. But James knew this was only the beginning. "Thank you, Linda," he replied, his heart swelling with pride. "That means a lot." But even as the Foundation's projects began to thrive, and as his credibility grew, James knew he couldn't afford to rest on his laurels. His greatest challenge still lay ahead: the community, the people whose lives depended on the Foundation's work. One afternoon, in a predominantly black neighborhood, James visited a school that had been transformed by the Foundation's support. Textbooks, technology, after-school programs. These were the tools that were supposed to open doors for students, but he wanted to see the change for himself. Walking down the halls, he was met with smiles, excitement, and the unmistakable energy of students who had a newfound sense of hope. A young girl, no older than 9, approached him hesitantly, holding a notebook tightly to her chest. "Are you the man who helped our school?" she asked, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. James knelt down to her level, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm part of the team that helped," he said gently, "but it's people like your teachers and your principal who make the real difference." The girl's eyes lit up, and she beamed up at him. "I want to be a lawyer someday, like my mom says you are." Her words hit him harder than he expected, the lump in his throat almost choking him. He swallowed hard and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You can be anything you want to be," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just keep working hard and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That moment, more than any board meeting or donor luncheon, reminded him of the impact Evelyn had sought to make, the change that was possible when people believed in each other, when communities banded together to lift one another up. But it wasn't all uplifting. There were moments of resistance, especially from those who questioned his ability to lead. At a high-profile fundraising event, a donor, a wealthy, older man, pulled him aside with a glass of champagne in hand. His voice was patronizing as he said, "You've got a lot on your plate, young man. It's admirable that you're trying, but don't you think this is a bit ambitious for someone with your background?" James' jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Ambition is what drives progress," he replied evenly. Evelyn believed that anyone, regardless of their background, could make a difference. "That's a belief I intend to honor." The donor raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Well, good luck with that," he muttered dismissively. But those moments, those challenges, only steeled James' resolve. He refused to let the skepticism of others define his path. He would prove them wrong, not just for his sake, but for the people whose lives depended on the Foundation's work. In the quiet of Evelyn's study, surrounded by her journals and notes, James found solace. Her words, written during her own battles with doubt and resistance, became his guiding light. One entry stood out to him: "Change is never easy. Those who fight for it are often met with resistance. But the only way forward is to persist, even when the odds seem insurmountable." He clung to that belief, using it as a mantra during the toughest moments, and began to see himself not as an imposter, but as a steward of Evelyn's vision. Slowly but surely, he was carving his own path, one that honored her legacy while reflecting his own unique perspective. By the end of his first month, progress was undeniable. The Foundation's projects were flourishing, and some of the skeptics had started to see James for the leader he was becoming. It was a grand opening of a vocational training center, one of the most significant initiatives funded by the Foundation, that marked a turning point. The room buzzed with energy as James stood off to the side, adjusting his tie. His heart pounded with nervous anticipation. Public speaking had never been his strength, but this was a moment that demanded his voice. Linda Grayson, standing at the podium, introduced him with a smile. "And now, I'd like to invite the man who has continued Evelyn Walker's incredible legacy, our very own James Carter." The applause was polite, but as James stepped forward, it felt like the eyes of the world were on him. He gripped the podium, his palms damp, and took a deep breath. "Thank you, Linda," he began, his voice steady, "and thank you to everyone here today. This isn't just another ribbon-cutting ceremony. It's a reflection of what happens when we work together to create change." He scanned the room, meeting the eyes of students, parents, community leaders, donors, and press. Faces filled with anticipation, hope, and curiosity. Some had seen him struggle, others had only just met him. But all of them were here because they believed in the mission. "When Evelyn Walker entrusted me with her foundation," he continued, "I'll admit, I wasn't sure I was the right person for the job. I was young, inexperienced, full of doubts. But Evelyn believed in me. She saw something in me that I couldn't yet see in myself. She told me that change doesn't happen overnight. It happens through persistence, dedication, and faith in the power of people." The weight of his words settled over the room. James paused for a moment, his voice thick with emotion. "This training center is just one example of what we can accomplish when we refuse to accept the status quo. It's a place where people can learn new skills, find better jobs, and build better futures. not just for themselves, but for their families and their communities. He let his words hang in the air, each one a promise, a vision for a better tomorrow. Evelyn often said that legacy isn't about wealth or fame. It's about the lives we change along the way. She left a legacy of hope, and it's up to us to carry it forward. The applause was louder this time, more heartfelt. James stepped back from the podium, his chest swelling with pride. He had come a long way from the overwhelmed, uncertain young man who had walked into Evelyn's world. Now, he stood in her shoes, ready to continue the work she had started. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, a young man approached him. His expression was earnest, his voice filled with gratitude. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to say thank you. This center. It's going to change everything for me and my family. I've been out of work for months, and now I have a chance to learn something new." James smiled, his heart tightening with gratitude. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, "because that's exactly why we're here, to give people a second chance." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, James stepped outside, a quiet vow forming in his heart. No matter how difficult the road ahead, he would continue the work Evelyn had started, for the people who needed it most, for the legacy that could never be erased. James Carter stood in the center of the community center, the energy of the crowd buzzing around him. Today wasn't just another grand opening. It was a symbol of all the perseverance, hope, and change he had fought so hard for. As he observed the guests, beneficiaries of the foundation's work, donors, and press, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. Not long ago, James had been a young man filled with doubt and uncertainty. When Evelyn Walker, the founder of the foundation, had entrusted him with the responsibility of continuing her life's work, he wasn't sure he was up to the task. He had walked into her world, not fully understanding the impact he could make. But now, standing before the crowd in the very building she had dreamed of, he knew he had found his purpose. Linda Grayson, a senior board member, stepped up to the podium and introduced James with a smile, her eyes gleaming with admiration. "You surprised me, James," she said. "I didn't think you had it in you, but you've proven me wrong." The words hit James like a wave, a reminder of how far he'd come. He had worked tirelessly, facing challenges that seemed insurmountable, but those words were a mark of his victory. "Thank you, Linda," James replied, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. The crowd's applause was brief, polite, but James could feel the weight of the moment. He stepped forward to the podium, his palms damp and his heart racing. Public speaking had never been his strength, but today was different. Today was not about him. It was about the people whose lives were being transformed. "I stand before you, not just as a man entrusted with Evelyn Walker's legacy, but as someone who was once unsure of his place in this world," James began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "Evelyn saw something in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself. She told me that real change doesn't happen overnight. It's built on persistence, dedication, and faith in the power of people." As he spoke, he could feel the presence of Evelyn's spirit all around him, urging him forward. The training center they were about to open wasn't just a building. It was a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience. The faces of the people who would benefit from the foundation's work flashed before his eyes. Families, parents, young students, all seeking a better future. "This is more than a ribbon-cutting ceremony," James continued. "This is a reflection of what happens when we come together to make a difference. This center isn't just about providing jobs. It's about providing opportunities. It's about transforming lives, creating hope where there once was none." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, meeting the eyes of the people who had believed in him when he had doubts. Their faces, full of anticipation and hope, filled him with a sense of belonging he had never known. He thought of Evelyn, her steady gaze and unwavering conviction. Evelyn once said that legacy isn't about wealth or fame. It's about the lives we touch. She left behind a legacy of hope. Now, it's our responsibility to carry it forward. The applause was louder this time, more heartfelt. James stepped back from the podium, a mixture of pride and humility swelling within him. The man who had once stumbled into this journey now stood firmly in his role, ready to continue the work Evelyn had started. After the ceremony, James mingled with the crowd, exchanging words and shaking hands. One young man approached him, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Mr. Carter, this center, it's going to change everything for me and my family," he said. "I've been out of work for months, but now I have a chance to learn, to build a better future." James smiled, his chest tight with emotion. "That's why we're here," he said, his voice thick with the weight of his responsibility. "To give people a second chance." As the crowd slowly dispersed, James stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the city. He stood there for a moment, taking it all in, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the doubts that had shaped him. It hadn't been easy, but it had all been worth it. Later that evening, James found himself in Evelyn's study, surrounded by the quiet solace of the room that had once been filled with her presence. On the desk sat a framed photograph of Evelyn, her eyes radiating the same determination that had inspired him from the start. He picked up the journal she had left him, flipping through the pages until he found one of her final entries. Her handwriting, familiar and comforting, spoke to him as if she were right there beside him. "James," the entry began, "the world is not an easy place, but it is full of beauty, resilience, and the capacity for change. Carry this work forward, not out of obligation, but out of love for the people we serve and for the future we can build together." The words settled into his heart like a quiet flame. Evelyn's legacy wasn't just about the foundation or the projects they funded. It was about the people whose lives they had touched, the hope they had inspired, and the belief that even the smallest act of kindness could spark something far greater. James leaned back in the chair, his mind turning to the future. There was still so much work to be done, so many challenges to face. But for the first time in his life, he felt ready. Not because he had all the answers, but because he understood that leadership wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence, compassion, and the unwavering willingness to keep moving forward, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. The night stretched on. The estate bathed in a gentle hush as James sat in the study, surrounded by Evelyn's legacy. He made a silent vow, one that resonated deep within him, to continue her work and honor her memory. It was no longer just about her vision. It was about the people who depended on that vision, the ones who needed hope the most. Evelyn had passed the torch to him, and now it was his turn to pass it on to others. Evelyn Walker's work was far from over, and James Carter was ready to carry it forward. Together, through her memory and his resolve, they would build a future defined by hope, justice, and opportunity for all.